So how many of you remember the old story of stone soup? You remember? You've heard of that, right? So for those of you that may not remember, this is one of the versions. There's a number of different versions out there, but this version is that travelers arrive in a village carrying almost nothing. But they do have a large pot, and they do make a fire, and they place the pot on top of the fire. They fill it with water and drop in one single stone. And curious villagers ask, "What are you doing? What is this?" And they say, "We're making stone soup. But it would be even better if you had a carrot in there." So somebody brings a carrot. And it would be even better if there was an onion. So someone else brings an onion. And before long, you have potatoes and herbs and all sorts of other vegetables begin to appear. What seemed an impossible thing, stone soup, becomes a feast because everyone shares what they have. Now, whether or not that story actually ever happened is beside the point. But that story has endured because it tells us something about ourselves. We often assume there's not enough until we begin sharing what we already have in our hands. And our world knows the story. But our world also tells another story. It tells us that there is never enough. There's not enough time. There is not enough money. There is not enough security. Not enough success, not enough to go around. And if there's not enough, then we had better hold tightly to what we have. Protect it, save it, keep it for ourselves and those closest to us. Scarcity becomes more than an economic idea. It becomes a way of seeing the world. And we heard from the prophet Isaiah today a different vision. He says, "Come, everyone who thirsts." Come, everyone who thirsts. Not come if you can afford it. Not come if you deserve it. Simply, come. God's invitation begins with abundance. The table is already being prepared. Grace is already being offered. The feast is already waiting. Then we come to Matthew's gospel. The disciples see a hungry crowd, and their conclusion seems perfectly reasonable. Send these people away. Send the crowds away. No one could blame them. 5,000 people plus women and children. It's an overwhelming need because there is not enough food. There is not enough money. There is not enough. Jesus never argues about the size of the problem. Instead, he says something astonishing. You give them something to eat. And that is not simply a command, it is an invitation. The disciples look at what they have. 5 loaves, 2 fish. They see scarcity. Jesus sees possibility. Now notice something important. Jesus does not feed the crowd all by himself. He takes bread. He blesses it. He breaks it. And then he places it back into the disciples' hands. He puts it back into their hands. The miracle flows through ordinary people. And that matters. Because this story is not only about bread, it is about trust. The disciples trust Jesus enough to place their small offering into his hands. Then Jesus trusts the disciples enough to place the bread back into theirs. That is how God so often works. Not by asking us to create miracles, but by inviting us to participate in them. And this is where the gospel begins to challenge the world around us. We live in a time when many people struggle to find affordable housing. Many wonder how they will put food on the table. Many feel isolated and forgotten. These are real struggles, and they deserve real compassion. But alongside those realities is another question. Have we begun to believe that scarcity is simply the way the world must be? The gospel refuses to accept that as the final answer. Jesus refuses to send people away hungry. He refuses to accept that fear should have the last word. He invites his followers to become part of God's abundance. That does not mean every problem disappears overnight. It does mean that followers of Jesus are called to live differently. We are called to trust more than we fear, to share more than we hoard, to see neighbors rather than competitors, to believe that God's kingdom is built through generosity instead of anxiety. Perhaps that is why the story continues to challenge us. The miracle did not begin when everyone was fed. The miracle began when 5 loaves and 2 fish were placed into Jesus' hands. The question before us is not whether we have enough to solve every problem in the world. The question is whether we are willing to trust God with what we already have. The things we already have, things like our time, our compassion, our resources, our gifts, our lives. God has always taken ordinary things and done extraordinary work through them. He's always taken just plain things and done amazing things with them. Things like a handful of bread, a cup of wine, a few frightened disciples, and a church that keeps saying yes. The world teaches us to begin with fear. God begins with abundance. The world teaches us to protect what is ours. Jesus teaches us to place what we have into God's hands. And may we have the courage to trust God's abundance. May we have the generosity to share what we have been given. And may we become people through whom God's abundance is made known. So, my friends, may we go and trust God's abundance, share God's gifts, and help feed a hungry world in whatever people are hungering for. So look for the abundance and share the gifts and help those around us. Amen.